stupid ass.
Oh shit. Go get him. Go get him.
Damn, bro, give me my phone. Put my shit right here and give me this, fam. Damn!
Shocking, isn't it? I would argue that that clip is troubling in two ways. The first is obvious, a student getting up in the middle of class and physically assaulting his teacher. However, the second issue I had with that clip is that the teacher just yielded to what the student wanted. And in doing so, he not only signaled the rest of the class that violence against the teacher is okay, but that it will actually produce positive results for you. Unfortunately, incidents like this are becoming more and more common in American public schools. And that's what we're going to talk about today. What's up guys, Sean here for the David Horowitz Freedom Center and StopK12Indoctrination.org. And today we're going to talk about a significant change in disciplinary policy that you may not have heard about. Under the Obama administration and Secretary of Education Arne Duncan, the Department of Education began forwarding the idea that there's a school-to-prison pipeline. What they did was highlight the differences in suspensions between racial groups in American public schools. Once they found the racial disparities in school discipline that they were looking for, rather than looking for an explanation to explain those disparities, they assumed it was racist and began cracking down on schools that have gaps in discipline. And that's not me being hyperbolic. Secretary of State Arne Duncan literally issued this threat to public schools in America. Even if your school rules are totally fair and administered totally fairly, we may come after you if your discipline numbers aren't racially balanced. Essentially what Duncan told the schools was, even if you have a reason for why there's a disparity in your school that is based on non-racist practices, he is still going to treat it as a racist policy and come after your school as if it were a racist policy. The Department of Education began investigating hundreds of school districts on their disciplinary practices, and schools were forced to implement positive behavior intervention supports, or PBIS, which replaced traditional disciplinary methods with a feel-good, softer approach. You know, because if a kid hits a teacher, he doesn't need to be suspended or arrested. He needs a pat on the back. Now, the results of this feel-good approach have been absolutely disastrous. In a comprehensive study on the implementation of PBIS in public schools, researchers noticed that schools that implemented PBIS experienced a significant drop in math and reading scores. And this drop still occurred in schools where there weren't really disciplinary problems in the first place. The city of Philadelphia banned suspensions for all non-violent disciplinary issues in their schools, and two things happened. The first was a drop in overall academic achievement, and the second was an explosion in rates of truancy. Mayor de Blasio, my mayor, implemented these policies in New York City schools. Violent instances in New York City public schools rose overall, and this rise in violence was felt disproportionately and poor in minority neighborhoods in the city. Prior to the implementation of these new disciplinary policies, 86% of teachers in one New York City school felt that discipline and order was being maintained in their school. After the policy was implemented, that number dropped from 86 to 19% of teachers. But unfortunately, the warnings from teachers went completely unheeded, and a student in that exact school was stabbed to death in the middle of history class. Taking away discipline and consequences from our public schools is disastrous. There's no nationwide conspiracy to get children into the prison system early. It's been proven that removing police, metal detectors, and consequences from our public schools doesn't make them any safer. It lowers academic achievement, increases truancy, it makes the schools more violent and dangerous, and it will even cost some students their lives. The Broward County Sheriff's Department implemented a similar program in Stoneman Douglas High School in Florida. It was called the Promise Program, and what it essentially did was prevent school resource officers from making arrests of students. The Broward County Sheriff's Department had numerous interactions with the gunman who later killed 17 people in Stoneman Douglas High School. They all knew that this kid was a problem. He was banned from being on campus because they believed he was so dangerous. But had the Promise Program not existed, and the police arrested this kid just one time, he would have been ineligible to buy the firearm that he used to kill those students. Look, we have to take back our schools from these radical activists. The cost of not doing so is far too high. If you care about these issues, please visit StopK12Indoctrination.org. There you can learn what actually goes on in our nation's public schools. You can read over our code of ethics and keep track of our efforts. This has been Sean Fitzgerald for the David Horowitz Freedom Center. Till next time.